Hello, and welcome to Reading for the Love of It Presents. My name is Erica Townsend, and I am the Executive Administrator with the East York-Scarborough Reading Association. I'm also the conference organizer of Reading for the Love of It. I'm very pleased to announce that we will be joined today by guest speaker LarrySwartz, who will be speaking about teaching tough topics. Please note that you are joining us in listen-only mode. This means that we cannot see you or hear you, but you should be able to hear and watch the presentation without any difficulty. I'm pleased to introduce my co-host, Mary Machusi from Pembroke Publishing. Mary is going to introduce our guest speaker. Mary?
Thank you, Erica, and thank you to the teachers and volunteers with Reading for the Love of It who turned the conference into the premier conference for educators in all of North America. Pembroke has been exhibiting at the conference for more than 30 years, and it's given us a chance to meet so many amazing educators. I am so sorry that we won't have a chance to meet in person this year, but it is my pleasure to be here to introduce to you virtually LarrySwartz. Larry tells me that he presented at your conference for the first time in the 1980s, and he went on to present again many times. He is currently an instructor in literacy and the arts at OISE, University of Toronto. He has a very strong background in teaching at the elementary level and also as a school board consultant for many years. He is considered an expert in children's literature and has published numerous teacher's guides for some of the key books that are used in classrooms today. He is the author of many Pembroke books on literacy and on children's literature. His first book with us was Drama Themes, and it's still available in its 4th edition. Today, Larry is going to be talking about teaching tough topics. He will discuss and introduce to you some amazing children's books that your students will love. He will share with you ideas for using them to engage students in a deeper understanding of their lives and the world around them. During these challenging times, I think he will convince you that a good children's book is an entry into many, many topics that are tough for teachers to discuss with children. So without any further ado, here's LarrySwartz.
Hello, folks. It's great to be chatting with you today. Of course, it'd be great if we were in a room sipping water or having our tea and coffee, but maybe you are as you're listening to me speak about tough topics. So I won't know if you're laughing at my jokes, which is something that I miss, but this is the reality that we're living in, and I still love talking about teaching, about literature, and my topic today is tough topics. So my world these days, I still do some courses from OISE, teaching virtually. I teach some literacy courses. I'm beginning a class next week called the Inclusive Classroom, and I've also taught a course on a drama. And that was quite fun on virtual teaching as well. So it's great to chat with you today. And I'm just going to look at 3 big issues. First of all, why tough topics? And what are the tough topics? And why children's literature? And of course, with Larry, you always get some book recommendations. So we're going to go through a little slideshow of some recent favorites that connect to today's theme. And you'll also receive a book list to support your thinking. So I love talking about books, obviously, and this could go on for another 2-hour webinar if I talk about all the books that I've read. This is dangerous for me to say, but since we're friends, I have read 153 books since we've been in lockdown. That's been my company and it's been my world, so it's sort of been a luxury. And I balance that with adult books. I've read a lot of poetry, picture books, but I've read 153 novels and nonfiction selections. And you can get that, you're going to get that information too. I do have a website. Dr. Larry recommends if you need some further support. So books are very important to me, keep me company, along with Netflix. I'm sure some of you have watched The Queen's Gambit, and we could talk about that and your response to that. And if you haven't watched it, it seems to be a favorite. And that's been keeping me company in these days, and I'm grateful that my family and friends are safe, and I hope all the same for your world. Why tough topics? Well, this is the title of my book. You've seen the cover of it. Many of my publications have dealt with children's literature. Uh, uh, and this was a book that I really enjoyed working on because it helped to synthesize and look at literature with a significant purpose. It came to me, I was doing a project for actually Indigo and another organization, and they came up and they asked me for a list of multicultural titles that they can promote with teachers. And so I worked on that list, and I really enjoyed looking around my bookshelves. And that was a neat little project for me that supported them. And it also, many, many teachers in my classroom, my student teachers, the teacher candidates would knock on my door. Larry, have you got a book for Black History Month? Have you got a book about teaching poverty? And so it seemed to be an interest that I drew from their courses and their practice teaching. So around that time, I really decided to consolidate my thinking and synthesize my learning of why use children's literature. I'm a literature-based person. I've always used books as a classroom teacher when I was in the Peel Board for 25 years. And my courses at OISE are always literature-based. And certainly speaking at Reading for the Love of It, people stop me in the house, Larry, what book are you recommending and what do you do with them? Well, come to my session. And people have been so responsive and looking forward to Larry's book list and walking around the publisher's display with Larry's brightly colored sheet. Have you got this book? Have you got this book? Well, that's exciting to me. So how do we choose books, and how do we spend our money on a picture book, and how do we make the choices for what we're going to share with kids at all different grade levels, at all different times, not just in our literacy programs? And so the framework was teaching tough topics. So we live in a challenging world, surprise, surprise, and this is not going to be a political webinar because I just turned off CNN an hour ago. But we live in challenging times, so how do we help our kids respect others and respect differences, to respect and maybe tolerate views that are different than our own, to bring some understanding to their own lives and their own views of the world. And another reason is we want students to build compassion. So these books build compassionate, empathetic understanding, and I think that's significant. We can't negate the world of emotional literacy, and some of these books connect to that. In our world, we have to find a place of equity and belonging that challenge us in their life. Finding that place of belonging is challenging in life, and it is challenging in our classrooms. So let our classrooms be safe places where we can build that forum where everyone belongs. We have the mandated curriculum. It's a busy, what Kathy Lundy calls the crowded curriculum, and others call that too, the crowded curriculum. Of course, we've got to teach our science and our math, and we want the kids to draw and paint and play. And those are the things we assess on the report card. And teachers might say, oh, I don't have time to do these tough topics and look at important, vital issues. Well, Kathy Lundy, in the introduction to our book, Creating Caring Classrooms, says that is the curriculum. We have to give kids a chance to have a voice, share their voice, and be surrounded with the voices of others, because that makes us human and it makes us compassionate. So that's why tough topics, and you would each have an interest, because I use the word vital and important because they're important, but how do we address them in our classrooms, in our crowded curriculum? We need to gain information. So once you choose to approach a tough topic, what information do I have to teach that topic? Then with the gathering of resources, what's available to us in print, online, in person-to-person, resources to share with the kids, and then what strategies are we going to introduce to bring those alive? So that's the impetus of the book and the framework for the 10 chapters that I've devised. Let's look at the 10 chapters then. These are my 10 topics. If you're familiar with the book, you might know what I've addressed here. And let's see what, I'm going to read the list out to you. no PowerPoint here. I'm going to read a list out to you. And these are the 10 that I devised. And it's generally from grades 1 to 9 that I'm particularly interested in. So race and diverse cultures is chapter 1. The immigrant and refugee experience, Indigenous identities, the Holocaust, physical and mental challenges, poverty, death, loss, and remembrance, gender identity and homophobia, bullying, and chapter 10 wraps it up with a chapter called Ripples of Kindness. Tough topics. So when you listen to that list, which one, they're all important. I'm not going to get into that discussion or argument. And of course, you would address them differently with different grade levels. And yesterday, a teacher in my class on Zoom asked, she says, when do you teach these topics? Sometimes there's an immediate need. The work on bullying began for me because there was an issue in my school when I was teaching a grade 3-4 classroom. So I found a couple of picture books, and that exploded into a unit with reading, writing, and talk, and I recognized a need. Something like death, loss, and remembrance. Well, if you know that there is a death in the students' lives, are you going to say, well, let's look at it through this picture book? So sometimes it's raw and you don't intentionally bring that kind of literature into the classroom, but sometimes it's just something that you want to expose with the children and have them share their stories and understandings. Oh, I'll tell a little story. Well, here's 2 little stories with death, loss, and remembrance. My editor for this book, Kate Revington, was brilliant, and she unfortunately passed away. This was the last project that she worked on. And she questioned me. She says, why are you putting death, loss, and remembrance in a book about social justice, diversity, and equity? And she was just, wanted clarification. I says, is there anything more equitable? We live and we die. And we experience death in different ways. And kids have different stories about death. So it is in the book because it might be a tough topic, and there's much literature that can help address that. I went in my second stories, I went into a grade 4 classroom, and I wanted some written material for my book. I wanted some authentic writing, and this is the chapter I chose. I went in with Eric Walter's book, Always With You. I had just acquired it, a picture book. You'll see a slide of it. And I went in with that book to invite students to tell stories. And I began to tell a story from my own life. I had just lost our dear friend, David Booth. I talked about how he was a mentor to me. The kids didn't know him, but I talked about how sometimes you have to say goodbye to friends. And I had that story in my head as I shared it with the kids. And then I said, does anybody have a story? They have stories about goldfish. They have stories about a pet. They have stories about their grandmother's dog. And some have stories about grandparents or aunts and uncles. And that's a reality. It's a tough topic. A boy in the corner, the kids were sitting in front of me on the rug, corner at the back here. And this was a tough story. He put up his hand. He said, 2 weeks ago, my brother committed suicide and we just had a memorial service. So, of course, I'm a visitor to this classroom. The kids were aware of the situation, the community. But how did he bravely put up his hand to share that story with me? Because I told my story. And it started with Eric's story. And that's always been my premise. One of the articles I've written, the best response to a story is to tell another story. So when I share my story, other stories might come to mind for the students and for you. Here's the trick, and I'm using this word, and it comes from Charles Reasoner, actually. David pointed it out to me. We want to invite students to reveal their stories. So we can do a workshop on comprehension strategies. For me, the most significant comprehension strategy is text-to-self connections. When a student can share his or her stories connected to a book that I'm sharing with them or that they're reading independently, the book has done its job. This is me in this story. So I want kids to learn about the identities of others, but I want those stories. And then I invited the students to write their stories. So this was in a section called Personal Narratives, and I used the students' writing in the book. So I don't know how I paused on that one. That wasn't planned on my agenda today, but those are the stories that come to mind. So I'm going to read that list one more time, and I'd love to get your hands up, and I'd love to be chatting with you and turn and talk in a classroom community or a hotel room. But listen to these, and my question is, which ones have you taught? Which do you feel comfortable teaching? And which for you is a tough, challenging topic? So I talked about why they are tough and challenging, but which for you might feel more comfortable teaching over another, and which is a tough, challenging topic for you to address. Listen to this list: race and diverse cultures, the immigrant and refugee experience, Indigenous identities, the Holocaust, physical and mental challenges, poverty, death, loss, and remembrance, gender identity and homophobia, bullying, ripples of kindness, all tough. Here's another story from my editor. I wanted to wrap up the book and give kids hope, and so I wanted to put a chapter in on kindness. And again, my editor, she had a brilliant mind, a critical mind. And she says, why are you putting kindness in this book? It's not, it's not going to follow the same framework as the other chapters. And my dear publisher friend, Mary Machusi, who you were introduced to, she says, is there a tougher topic to teach than kindness? So I think we've got to bring that compassionate understanding in. So the subtitle of the book is How to Use Children's Literature to Deepen Understanding of Social Justice, Diversity, and Equity. And the questions from my editor just were critically analyzing that and pushing me forward to think about those. So those are some tough topics. And in a nutshell here's the only gift I can give you, the best gift I can give you in this little chat, is start with a story. They're tough topics. Find a book that's going to help you address this topic. Find a piece of literature, a picture book, a poem, a novel, a nonfiction selection, an illustration that is going to invite the kids to respond and share their stories and build an inquiry into this unit. So it's as simple and as complicated as that. And of course, we have to find good literature, and that's where teachers ask me, Larry, have you got a good book to teach about race and diverse cultures? And for each of these, one of the things that I enjoy about this book is I was able to do great book lists. So that ends each chapter. It's called Great Books for a Tough Topic. And this is also dangerous for me to see. I don't know why I'm sharing it, but why not? I owned all those books. It wasn't just going online and researching them. I made sure that I read them, or a few friends recommended some titles, but all the books that I recommend are part of my repertoire. And so that's my world. But I think if you want to approach a topic, I think we have to go in, if we want to talk about race and diverse cultures. And let's be honest, since we're being honest with each other, for me, I don't know what you answered in your head, and I'd love to have you share your answer in front of me. The Indigenous identities is a tough topic. And at the OISE program, they look at it across the curriculum, across subjects areas, in all the courses. And I support that. But for me, it's a tougher topic because, like many people, when I was doing research, they feel that they don't have the right information, or they don't know if they're saying the right thing, or what resources am I doing as a white man to introduce this Indigenous identities. It's important, it's vital, and my answer is start with the book. I feel comfortable going with the book title. I'll show you a couple on my slideshow. We'll get to that slideshow, but I think a book is going to help give some information, give them a minds-on to the experience, but it is also going to raise questions. I want the questions to come from the kids so that they can find some answers to the questions. And I would be honest with them, we're learning together. Let's find out this information because I don't have all the answers. That's just an example of one. Do I know more about the Holocaust because I'm a Jewish citizen? Again, the literature helps me find some answers in different points of view and bring in Kathy Kaiser's books that are giving me narratives to explore that issue. So that's why I want children's literature, and it's as simple as that. It's my highlighted message from this little chat that I'm having with you. Children's literature, it helps kids to make connections. It invites kids to reveal their stories. It raises questions of concern, questions from the teacher and questions from the kids, which can lead into inquiry. And those literature allows us to have meaningful discussions. And in discussions that we can share our own views and we can listen to the views of others. We learn about the identities of others. That's why we share some of this literature. But more importantly, we think about our own identities in connection to those kids. So it's about promoting an understanding of our own identities and the identities of others. And when we do share literature, particularly picture books, we're exploring narratives, and these narratives are case studies for looking at relationships, for looking at the values, for looking at these topics, and looking at the struggles that some of the citizens in our world have and the citizens in our classroom. And this literature serves as artifacts for meaningful response, and of course, which includes reading, writing, talk, the arts, and media. So it's a way to move it into our literacy program and across the curriculum to explore those issues. So that's just an attempt to give some rationale of why children's literature. I'm just going to do a quick promo here. In each chapter, I talk about a personal journey, why I chose the chapter. You'll meet some expert voices. I called on colleagues. I called on Kathy Kaser wrote, and Eric Walters wrote for me as well. Catherine Patterson has a piece in there. So I called on expert voices to talk about the topic, and some colleagues from university. I begin with the language and vocabulary as a way in. So what does racism mean to the students? Discrimination. So I think we have to give some understanding and build knowledge of what those terms mean. So that's the first activity as a minds-on. And then we call opening up. I do a minds-on activity, something introduced, whether it's a discussion, whether it's a storytelling, whether it's a drama, to introduce a theme. And the framework for each chapter is 2 children's literatures. I chose from a range of genres: picture books, poems, script, and I have photograph in there. And I have 2 examples in each chapter, and each chapter has different response strategies, giving you some insights of how to approach that in your classroom and to adapt it for different grade levels. And then my favorite thing is the last thing that wraps up the chapter is great books for tough topics. And those are some of my book lists, which I love doing. So that's a little overview, a little promo of the book. And it's just something to think about. I'd love to hear the questions that are in your head at this time and how you would approach it. And maybe you want to know some specific books. I'm going to do a little book talk now, and I've developed a slideshow that we hope works, and I'll give you a very quick book talk. And these are 10 titles. They each represent the different themes in the book, and I'll give you a little bit book talk. The slides are going to be available to you, and you will also be getting book lists. Erica, let's see how we can do with this. There is my information, which is available to you. Email me if you have any questions. My website, once a month, I post recommended books. I do grown-up reads, picture book reads, and now I'm doing middle-aged novels this month. I try for once a month, and it's free. Dr. Larry recommends if you want to see what Larry's reading. So there's some information available to you. And the first slide is my book, Teaching Tough Topics. So you saw it in the promo, and we worked hard on that cover, and I kind of liked it because digging into the books, we got to look at things that, gives me pause to wonder. There's the title of the book. And the first book, actually, I think on the list is not necessarily a tough topic. Erica? It's just a favorite book in the last 2 years, The Word Collector. Well, it is a tough. How do we teach vocabulary? How do we teach spelling? This book is you don't need a lesson plan for it because you just want to invite kids to becoming word collectors. So I'm very fond of Peter Reynolds' book, and it actually inspired me to write a book called Word by Word, but that's another story. It's just a great book that was on my top 10 list the year before last. Next. The Proudest Blue is a Canadian publication. It's a story of a hijab and the family. And this is based on personal experiences. And look now in the year 2020, this was written last year, I believe, 2020, we have a book that looks at the hijab. Did we have those books when we went to school? And how do we help kids look at their identity? And this girl tells her story. Beautiful cover there. Next. Out. I just developed a unit for a drama resource. I'm very, very interested. I think one of the largest collections I have is the refugee experience and the immigration experience. And I went into a grade 5 class and we looked at this book called Out. And that is the cover. You might not see the details, but it's in a black and white illustration of figures on a boat, and they are out. And you'll see 2 figures there in brightly colored clothing. And what do they represent? So in my head, making a text-to-text connection, I'm thinking of Schindler's List, where we had the girl, the movie was in black and white, we had the girl in her red coat. This is the story of a mother and her daughter who come to a new land, and they find safety in the new land, and they learn the language, but the father hasn't joined them. He's still back in a refugee camp. So there's a book that we can explore before, during, and after. Why were they forced to go out? Tell me about their journey as immigrants and what happens about the father. Beautiful book called Out. Next. Oh, I've shared this. I think I've shared this with 1,000 teachers, and I know it was one of my workshops at the Reading for the Love of It. I can picture myself standing in front of the room. The topic was looking at gender issues. I love this book. Christine Baldacchino, Isabel Malafont illustrated it. Morris Micklethwait in the tangerine dress. A boy who goes to school and he wears a tangerine dress and he loves it. Why? It reminds him of the sun, tigers, and the color of his mother's hair. And so he is teased for wearing a dress. Boys don't wear dresses. His mother paints his fingernails pink, and they call it pinky fingers, pinky fingers. Why would a mother paint her son's nails pink, knowing that he's going to get into challenging times? But this boy rises it above it all. And here's a spoiler alert. The girl in the class wants to wear that dress. You give me that dress. He says, I'll give it to you when I'm finished with it, but I'm not finished with it. And she shouts, boys don't wear dresses. And the punchline of the story, this boy does. A great book about bullying, resilience, strength, and gender identity. Thank you. Erica? I mentioned Eric's book. This was his picture book. He's since written many books, even though this was last year's publication. Carlo Louis did the illustrations. A beautiful book about a girl who at the beginning of the story learns that her grandfather has passed away. And he leaves as her messages, and they actually appear as messages that you can open the flaps. And she reads these messages throughout her life. When she goes to school, when she goes to secondary school, when she goes to college, when she's married, she reads messages from her father, her grandfather, always with you. So that's an aspiring story to talk about people who've moved on from our lives or maybe have passed. And that was the one that I referred to with that grade 4 class that I worked with, always with you. Eric Walters is a children's literature hero, and he's a friend too. Next. Those shoes, I think if I had to choose one book about teaching poverty, and many colleagues agree, those shoes, this is about a boy who wants the same shoes as everybody else. And his grandmother says there's a difference between want and need. But to belong with his peers, he wants those shoes. So this is the story of how he acquires shoes and how he fits in with the community and how we look at our needs in our lives. So for looking at poverty, I would certainly, I did use this in my book. I went into a grade 2-3 class and had them give me some ideas of what poverty is. The activity in the book is define poverty. What does poverty mean? So we were trying to break some myths and stereotypes, and the kids, and they had to draw a picture of poverty. Simple activity. Have the kids draw a picture of what it means to be poor. Have them draw a picture of what a bully is. And those kinds of depictions or representations help us uncover some themes. And poverty, well, there's a tough topic because there's kids sitting in front of you who are sitting in that circumstances, just as they're sitting in the immigration experience. There's refugees in our classrooms. Poverty is part of our many kids' identities. So we do say, oh, this is too sensitive, I'm not going to do it, or are we honoring those kids' life? It is a tough topic. You know that many of you know that the Elementary Teachers Federation, my colleague Jim Giles, did a huge, huge initiative with a great resource called Possibilities that looks at the understanding poverty in our schools. Great book, I love this one. Next. The Promise, this was written by friend Margie Wolf and her cousin, and it's a story based on biographical information about two sisters who were in the Auschwitz prison camp. So it's a promise that they kept to each other. This one I chose, the illustrations are quite remarkable. So Margie gave me permission to put it into my book. And we start looking at what do we know by looking at these pictures? What questions do we ask? And actually, when I did some research, if you have the latest issue of Book News, actually the previous one, I just got the newest one in my mailbox, but they did an issue devoted to the Holocaust education. I wrote an article about children's literature exploring the Holocaust issue, and that was one of the books that I used. There's many books, but when I did the research, statistics astound me. I'm going to get the number wrong, but there's something like 65% of high school students never heard of the Holocaust. You can challenge me on that. I'm going to do some research to get the number, but it's unbelievable to me. I'll get that number exact, but even not even knowing about it, I think our literature and our classrooms can find a place for building that knowledge and that history. Next. The Other Side. I use this book in the Race and Diverse Cultures. How could I not celebrate Jacqueline Woodson, one of our best authors? This version that I have was the 20th anniversary edition, A Girl on a Black Swing. And if you can't see the image, but there is a fence there, and it's a girl, a Caucasian girl, who's sitting on the fence. What's the story here? Are these girls ever going to meet? Why are they separated? Will that fence ever be broken down? What does the white girl's mother instruct or inform or advise her daughter? And so this is about segregation and overcoming it. The Other Side is a wonderful way to talk about Black Lives Matter and belonging and sharing and breaking down stereotypes. Again, I went into a grade 3 class and worked with these kids, and they gave me some responses, and I used that in my chapter on diversity and equity. I got an email from a colleague at OISE and said, Larry, I need one book to recommend for looking at differentiation and looking at racism. And this is the one that I chose. Every grade level can experience it. Any book by Jacqueline Woodson, her other book called Each Kindness is Strong. Next. Stolen Words. Here we have Melanie Florence. This is my example that I put in for understanding the residential school experience. And it's a story about this girl who wants to learn about her grandfather's past. And so the questions that she asks is the questions that we might ask as well as we start to build understanding of this event. Next. Oh, this I think is going to win the Caldecott Prize. It's certainly one of my top 3 picture books last year. We Are Water Protectors. Oh, I wish I could sit down and read the book with you and open it. But it does look at nature. It looks at water. It looks like the indigenous cultures and respect for nature. The illustrations are staggering. Carol Lindstrom wrote this. It'll be curious if it wins Best Picture Book, but it certainly is deserving an award because it's a strong marriage of words and pictures, but the themes are very important to teach as well. It provides lots of information about water protection. Next. I Didn't Stand Up. I chose this one, a Canadian title by Lucy Falcone, because it deals with the bully experience. Not just bullying, but any kind of prejudice. This is about, I didn't stand up. I knew that she was a bully, but I didn't stand up. I knew that kids were making fun of him because of his skin color, but I didn't stand up. So this is about that bystander role. Why didn't you stand up? How could we stand up? What would you do if you were in those situations? So these different scenarios are provided for looking at belonging. I like this book a lot, and that's the one I chose for my bullying representation. Next, here we go. Oh, A World for Mine, a beautiful book. So Pajama Press did a stunning book 2 years ago about kindness, and each of the authors' illustrators gives you a sentence about kindness. So this new one is A World of Mindfulness. Use your senses, find your calm. So how can we be mindful? How can we be calm? So page 1, let me look at page 1. It's sitting on my desk here. I am here. I am here. There's the identity of mindfulness. I know who I am. I breathe in the smell of fresh cut grass. It fills my lungs with energy. So this invites kids to be calm, think of the moment, take deep breaths, and be aware. So this is a beautiful book where each of the authors, illustrators look at mindfulness. Hooray for Pajama Press. Next. All are welcome. This is by Penfold. You don't need any more than the title of this book. Any book that invites kids to think about belonging and their place in a community. And this book does so beautifully, beautifully. And when you lift the cover up, it becomes the poster. So many teachers who bought this book put it in the classroom. But thinking about belonging and welcoming is in that a great title. Now I'm looking at the pictures here, and I'm going to step aside. Another book that I just bought recently was by LeBron James. LeBron James wrote a picture book, and it's called I Promise. Very simple text. I promise to take care of others. And I enjoyed the book, and I bought the book because it's part of my kindness mantra. And what interested me is that he has kids like this. I'm looking at the illustrations, and they are Afro-American kids. There's 1 or 2 Asian kids. There's 1 Caucasian kid in the book. Here we are, 2020, well, it was 2020 that I read this book, and we've got books now. There was 1 Caucasian book, and look how we had to look for books where kids wearing hijabs when we went to school in the 80s, in the 90s, in the year 2000. How many books had those representations? So this book picture reminded me of that, and we have to certainly celebrate that, not gratuitously, but looking that we all are in a different part of the community. Next, this for me is the best book of the year. Canadian author Jordan Scott, I Talk Like a River. I'm going to bet you a quarter today that this is going to win awards at the end of the year. It's a staggering, staggering picture book. And Jordan Scott was a stutterer. He tells a story about not speaking like the other kids did. And his father tries to help him understand what his challenges are. And he says, I talk like a river. So we go look at the river with the gurgling and the gurgling, with staggering. Sydney Smith has won a few awards. And really, Sydney, this is the best you've done recently for me. I Talk Like a River, a beautiful book about stuttering. And I want to give it to the new president of the United States, because this book was part of his life and identity. And I think next we finish off with, that's a good book too, Teaching Tough Topics. Okay, we can go back to me, Erica, just to finish off. There's my book talk, and there's the ones that I didn't do as well. Now, folks, now we'll talk about novels. I don't have a PowerPoint of novels, but how can I not talk about novels? I'm only going to mention 3. These aren't on slides, but I need every teacher in grades 5 and up to read Ghost Boys by Jewel Parker's Road. Ghost Boys. On page 1, a black boy is shot by a white policeman. The boy goes up to heaven, and he meets other boys who were tormented or abused, other black boys. And he looks down at the trial of the policeman. A very, very important book. I think that's a must read. Last year, my must read was Refugee by Alan Gratz. Ghost Boys is the one that I'm recommending. I'm going to recommend Eric Walters. He wrote a book in the spring, Don't Stand So Close to Me. And it's about the pandemic, how kids were struggling with the pandemic. He wrote this book, and this is the spoiler alert, he wrote it in about 6 weeks from draft to publication. he sent me the draft copy, and I says, Eric, how do you do it? Because that's who Eric is. He looks at real issues. And this was back in the spring of 2020. It was an ebook over the summer. It's now available in paperback. And I wonder what stories would change now that we're moving into 2021 and how kids experience the pandemic. Actually, you're going to see a lot of literature. I just bought a new book called And the People Stayed Home. And the People Stayed Home. And it's about what do we do when we are not allowed to go outside. I think I'm going to give that book to our premier. And another beautiful book called Outside In. Outside In. We're sitting inside our homes. How are we going to respect the world outside? This author, Underwood, I think this is one of the people are voting for this one, for the call to cut. It doesn't make it a great book just because it wins a prize, but it's a beautiful, simple book about being stuck inside. And she wrote this book. Did she write it during the pandemic, before the pandemic? It was published in 2020, but again, it's a book for our times. And one more novel that I love this book. It's one of my top 3, Becoming Muhammad Ali. That's by James Patterson and Kwame Alexander. James Patterson needs no introduction. He's the #1 author, not only for adults, but for kids. He's always on the New York Times bestsellers list with his books. And Kwame Alexander's the #1 Black poet. And together they did a biography of Cassius Clay, Becoming Muhammad Ali. I love the book because it looks at racism through history. And I'm just going to finish off then looking at our theme today. When the Black Lives Matter movement was, and not that it wasn't there before, but when it came to explode in the spring and summer, I really started. I started reading many books. I always have, but many of the books that I read over the summer dealt with Black culture in particular. And I want to look at other races and other cultures, but I was interested. There's many books about Black Lives Matter. And my question when I raised to my students is, how can we not address it? And one teacher in a workshop, she says, I'm just too afraid to address it. I just don't have the language. And that was my point. And I'm not passing judgment, but if they don't get it from us, because there isn't a curriculum that says teach Black Lives Matter. There isn't a curriculum that says teach poverty. There isn't a curriculum binder that says teach bullying. We as teachers make choices from our personal needs, our personal interests, and what we want the students to learn. One book isn't going to cut it. If I read Stolen Words, I can't pretend that I've done Indigenous identities. But over time, it helps me build a literacy program. It helps me build a compassionate program and a social justice, diversity, and equity program. So start with a good book is my final message, my mantra. You've heard it before from Larry. You would have heard it in the halls of the hotel, and now you hear it from me. I really thank you for listening, and I hope I gave you food for thought, and I hope I gave you some questions, and I hope I gave you a great book title that you might want to investigate. Thanks for participating, and Erica, thank you for everything.
Thank you, Larry. So many books and such wonderful insights to share with students. I'm sure we're all going away with at least one book to add to our list. Pembroke is pleased to be able to offer one of you a free copy of Larry's latest book, Teaching Tough Topics. Back to Erica, who will share the details with you. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Mary. And a big thanks also to Larry for providing such a wonderful presentation. It's much appreciated by all of us. I will be selecting a name from the list of registrants for today's webinar to win a copy of Larry's new book, and I will reach out to that individual in the next day or two. This webinar was recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel. It will be accompanied by a copy of the bibliography, so please feel free to share that information with your colleagues and friends. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and please remember to continue reading for the love of it. Thanks so much, and bye for now.